I think at this point, we have established that ExileLord is no stranger to crafting and publishing some of the most iconic hard charts in all of Guitar Hero. His ability to create attention-grabbing melodies, fun song structures, and while obnoxious at times, iconically difficult sections, there's a reason he has cemented himself as a prominent charter and producer in the Guitar Hero and Clone Hero community. The chart we're going to be going over fits all the attributes I just noted, but when I say there's an emphasis on some of the hard sections being obnoxiously hard, there's no exaggeration in that statement, and one section in particular can barely be described by words, rather you have to see it to believe it. A handful even thought about tackling this chart on, and even less actually went through with such a daunting task, as even the best of players rendered this chart virtually impossible no matter how much the game evolved over time. This is the score progression of Obsidian. Obsidian was composed and charted by ExileLord, and would have a teaser of the song itself released on October 8th, 2011, and would be released officially on Guitar Hero on November 18th, 2011. This would be more or less a teaser for the upcoming community track pack, also known as CTP2. The strange thing about this release is that unlike ExileLord's usual releases being on his own channel, this one in particular was instead released on another custom song charter and composer's channel, the Eruption Offer. If we take a look at ExileLord's other videos around this time period, just about all of them were Team Fortress 2 gameplay, a first-person shooter, and rarely would anything remotely related to Guitar Hero would be released. In fact, in 2010, he initially thought about quitting Guitar Hero, but still continued to upload what are some of his most popular charts to date. One common thread on ExileLord's video, swordandboard.mp4, seems to show some reasoning why he's been opting out of uploading Guitar Hero content, as he expresses numerous times with a certain commenter that he's simply done with Guitar Hero, and just by the screenshot alone, he seemed to have moved on. Lastly, some messages on Discord confirm this, as ExileLord expresses that this chart was essentially a middle finger to the community for them not respecting his decision to simply upload other forms of content. He wanted to chart something hard enough that made him feel alive, in his words. Those emotions are what we're going to go over right now in this chart, and you can decide if he fulfilled his goal or not. Obsidian starts out as unapologetic as it can, with its 22 notes per second sweeps that go directly into solo strumming at the same speed, along with reverse solo strumming to test the fretting skills a bit. Right after are these tricky triplets that go into some relatively innocent alternating tapping triplets. This strumming section here is similar to the intro strumming, except now you have to accompany for there being triplets on the latter notes, and like the intro, you have to fret the second half since it's reversed, which is extremely awkward, hence the title of this section, Awkward. The strumming section directly after is almost unviable for non-strumming specialists, which is where most people simply do what is called rake strumming, a method where players can either spread their fingers out and strum multiple times on the way up and down in a single motion, or by using a modified guitar, where flicking the switch in a specific way with one finger will activate the strumming switch however many times it's modified to do so. After the solo strumming comes back for about 10 more seconds, we're finally at the break, and I probably have said the word strumming a bunch of times, but you can see why this song is so hard right off the bat. Except we haven't gotten to the actual hard part yet. But before we get there, we still have one more strumming-oriented section to cover quickly, which is called riffing. Rake strumming this would require an insane amount of transition inconsistency, and at that point, you're really risking overstrumming on at least one of these due to the nature of how rake strumming functions, so most players consider alt-strumming the entire section as a result. The solo, surprisingly enough for the most part, is one of the easier sections of the entire chart, as the tapping methods utilized to hit most of these sections are much less technical and difficult to hit compared to the strumming-heavy sections. Sweeptacular is where things really begin to ramp up with its varying amounts of tapping and fretting required to hit it, especially at this speed, and then Doomsday D follows right up with its hard chord fretting near the end that has this strange X-shaped resemblance to it. But what is quite literally one of the most unfathomable sections in all of Guitar Hero is this. This is Message to Blue. Some of you might be wondering how this section even functions and why it looks like the way it does. If you turn your head to the right and look at every chunk of the notes, it spells out a message saying, hit more notes. Blue in this instance is being referred to top layer blue metal. It's pretty hard to even describe a section of this caliber in terms of measuring how difficult it is. It's so absurdly technical and requires the most pristine chord fretting anyone can possibly do. With its barrage of quint and quad chord transitions, with some awkward triple chord strums too, technical strumming, and let's not even forget the transition from Doomsday D that leads right into it. People quite literally laughed at this section, and it more or less gave the chart a bit of a joke or meme feeling to it, meaning it probably wasn't going to be very competitive as a result. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves, because now that we're all familiar with the chart, let's see who really decided to take this chart on. Just 4 days after Obsidian's release, Blue Metal would have a Tech FC on November 22nd, 2011, where he FC'd every section individually, hence the term Tech FC, or Technical FC. At least for the most part it was a Tech FC. Every section individually was definitely FC'd, but one section was done at a much slower speed. And you guessed it, it was Message to Blue. It was done on slowest speed in practice mode, which is roughly half the speed of the original song. A few weeks later, Blue Metal decided to at least see if the letters themselves were doable on normal speed, and he proved they were, by FC'ing them all separately on December 9th, 2011.
Yes. R.
No top players opted for a full run of the song at all, since they most likely didn't see a reason to. But Randy Ladyman gave it a full swing on March 18th, 2012, and got 610k points with a 95%.
Whatever. That'll do it. Yeah, whatever.
While there are certainly some solid note streaks in this, and the score is decent too, Randy was taking some punches from this chart, especially in the triplet strumming areas, Sweeptacular, and he wanted nothing to do with Message to Blue, as he mainly just strummed the quints for points. No runs would even come close to this score either in subsequent months, as people were primarily just trying to pass it. But what would come out down the line is a little more viability towards the Tech FC at the very least.
Which there are several E's.
Take third.
What the fuck?
TobyGH3, who is considered one of the greats, if not the greatest at this point in his Guitar Hero career, uploaded a section montage of tons of crazy section-specific FCs. In this montage was Message to Blue, and he managed to get it on slow speed, which from what I can find on Score Hero is roughly 5/6 of the original song's speed. This was fantastic progress from it being FC'd on slowest speed by Blue Metal. The problem was that no one really took note, as no other player was necessarily motivated to push this section to a potential full speed FC, because not only would this be the last footage we would see on Message to Blue, but it would be the last notable footage we would see on this song for a while. Compared to a lot of other songs ExileLord had released around this time, there were just simply more fun and accessible options to play, like Solus 3, Misadventure, and even Epidox to an extent. A few years later, stuff like Amalgamation, and especially Solus 4 swept the community off their feet, and all eyes were on those as well. Obsidian was a chart that was intended to be rude and not that accessible, so it made sense that it was just rendered as a brief meme chart that no one wanted to bother with anymore, and would go unplayed for years to come. Enter DarklyGH. In 2018, DarklyGH had started to show a bit more prominence in the scene, being the first person to FC Solus 2, hitting robotic buildup from Epidox a bunch of times, FCing the Betrayal, 3999 Machinations A, and of course, the legendary Solus 4 FC that is still revered as one of the most iconic FCs in Clone Heroes history. Darkly has an interesting knack for making notoriously hard sections seem a lot more viable than they were originally thought to be. Murderous Solo from Solus 2 was considered not viable in a real run for the longest time, Robotic Buildup was in a similar boat too, Machinations A is still pretty inconsistent for most top players today. He made all these convoluted and overly technical sections seem reasonable now. On February 13th, 2019, Darkly had become the first ever person to FC Message to Blue in its entirety. No individual letters, no pausing, it officially becomes taken down after a little over 7 years. The main inspiration that inspired Darkly to tackle this section seemingly out of nowhere was from a Facebook post by player AbyssionQC. He claimed to have hit the section in 2 different chunks, the 6 letters at the beginning and the 6 letters at the end. He proposed a challenge to everyone that if they could at the very least add another letter on top of that, whether it be from the beginning letters or the end letters, he would give $10 for each extra letter, or $60 for the entire FC. If we take a look at the date of this post, it only took about a week for Darkly to learn the section and FC it, which is insanely quick when taken into perspective. Immediately following this, a Tech FC would be released too, and according to the video description, Darkly got the Tech FC out of the way just 10 minutes after FCing Message to Blue. A new era was now officially on the rise with Obsidian being Tech FC'd by one person. About a month later, player FrostedGH, who around this time was also nabbing first ever FC after first ever FC, became the second person to get Message to Blue.
Oh my god, yes! It's fucking over, boys! 2.5 weeks!
What's interesting about this FC is that in his fretting, he's actually using all 5 fingers, which means he's using his thumb for the green note and then the rest of the fingers for the remaining 4 notes. And according to Darkly, he actually used a similar strategy to obtain his first FC of the section too. While this strategy is viable for a Tech FC, doing this transitioning out of Doomsday D would be almost impossible in a real run, and if anything, counterproductive. But a player named Chandler would prove it was doable with 4 fingers on October 5th, 2019, utilizing his index finger to assist him in hitting both the green and red button at the same time for the quint chords.
Yes! Oh my god. Holy shit. Ho ho ho! I have seen it. It's done.
With multiple people now having a Message to Blue FC under their belt and it being doable with just 4 fingers, it seemed like some serious progress was being made with the song compared to the early 2010s. While no picture or video exists of this specific run, someone in the Clone Hero Discord reported that FrostedGH had gotten a -12 during one of his Solus 5 streams on October 17th, 2019. So players were now actually giving the song full runs, even if they weren't the most common. One run, however, completely shattered everyone's thoughts about the song's FC viability, because on November 27th, 2019, one player would raise the bar beyond what it was thought to be set at. Darkly had submitted a -2 run on Obsidian. Just about everything in this run was perfect. His first miss occurred during the transition between Trip and Awkward, and then just a single miss in Message to Blue on the letter R. Not to mention he nailed the transition from Doomsday D to Message to Blue as well. So there was definitely a lot of practice going on behind the scenes that people weren't aware of, and it couldn't show more prominently in this run. A new person would also join the Message to Blue FC club, as Asai would obtain the 4th FC on it on January 10th, 2020. With multiple people having Message to Blue FCs under their belt, the catalog of players that showed potential to pull it off was slowly starting to grow now. Darkly wasn't going to let people get too close to him, because on Twitter, he posted 2 videos that separated himself far from the rest. FCing Message to Blue twice in a row, along with a Doomsday D to Message to Blue FC, was absurd for the Clone Hero community to process. Everything everyone knew about the song was just completely warped, and everyone knew it was FC'able now. Darkly was after this song, and given he stated he FC'd Message to Blue 13 times on the day of the Twitter post, the FC was just a matter of him putting in the extra work to put it all together now. A couple months would go by, and no updates, chokes of any sort, a -1, Overstrom 100%, nothing. He would, however, upload some very impressive first ever FCs, such as Groundhog, Mike Orlando Solo Medley 2, and a fantastic run on the good end. With the abundance of uploads on anything but Obsidian, perhaps Darkly didn't want to go through similar struggles he faced with Solus 4. After all, his Solus 4 grind quite literally required every bit of energy he had, and to do it all over again for another ExileLord chart seems like a lot to ask for. A little more time went by though, and a glimmer of hope began to flourish, because Darkly had truly pulled off something amazing now. Some of you are wondering why he paused in sheer shock and didn't continue playing. Well, if we take a look at the note streak, we can see that he wasn't on FC pace at all, and he pulled off what is called a reverse choke, where a player messes up during an easier part of the song, which would be awkward and riffing, and hits the hardest part instead, which in this case is hitting both Doomsday D and Message to Blue. Getting to Message to Blue on an FC run is already a chore on its own, but hitting it on a non-FC run is just gut-wrenching to think about. It really wouldn't be Darkly though if he pulled off one of the worst chokes in this game's history and then came right back with a vengeance. Because that same day, that's exactly what he did, and history was officially made now. Even after Solus 4 was FC'd by Darkly, people still were confident enough to call Obsidian impossible or very unlikely to FC, and once again, tons of people were proven wrong by Darkly, and another FC was added to the list. No one else since then has taken the initiative to become the second person to FC it, but people have tried pushing Message to Blue to new lengths, as Lego Keegan 411, previously known as SchmooeyGH, FC'd it on 125% and got the rest of the sections for a 125% tech FC. It took 7 years alone for Message to Blue to be FC'd, so if anything, it really shows how talented Darkly is at all these obnoxiously difficult ExileLord sections that only a handful of people can do once in a blue moon. Darkly would go on to release his first ever montage too, FC'd the entire Dreamcatcher discography, which is the longest FC to date, FC'd Crisis City, and plenty of other more than noteworthy accomplishments. Who knows what the next huge FC Darkly has that he might surprise the community with once again. But I think a lot of us will be glued to our screens when it does happen, and will be more than excited to see it all unfold. This has been the score progression of Obsidian. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to support the channel for more rhythm game content like this, go ahead and stop over to my Patreon, as it helps the channel a ton, and drop a sub if you're new here too. I'd also like to give a shout out to my patrons for supporting the channel, and feel free to check out my other links below if you're interested. I'll see you all in whatever video I upload next, and take care.